Here's a provocative intro hook. Gwent in real life is validation for the anti-video gaming congressional camp from the early 90s, because Gwent in real life is a stark reminder that video game violence is all gratuitous fantasy and doesn't work in real life. You can't trap the knight, it doesn't work like that, not without significant rule changes. But before I go on, let me clarify. The topic of this video is some limited edition promotional swag that CD Projekt printed out as bonuses for the collector's editions of the two Witcher 3 expansions. But apparently they printed out successive runs because that must have been a good idea, as evidenced by me picking them up for $10 a pop in the first place. I never buy anything like this is way out of my MO. This is not, however, the standalone Gwent game they announced at E3, which is a fleshed out version of the minigame from Witcher 3 expanded and modified enough to stand on its own. That's the idea anyway. Gwent in real life is different from Gwent the full game, which is different from Gwent the minigame, which is the basis for Gwent IRL, and I was interested in seeing if they'd try to change things up here, but unfortunately, and understandably, that's not the case. Inside each box are 2 decks of straight reproductions from the game, accurate down to the shading. The only differences I could spot were a speck of artificial creases that you're just gonna have to make on your own. Also included is some promotional flyer you can throw away, a rulebook you're never gonna throw away, and some cardboard score counters. But let's start with the good, the one piece in here that really ties the whole thing together and could make Gwent work for people who don't know what a Gwent is, are these handy faction rule reference cards, which also catalog effects like weather conditions and unit abilities. And the second saving grace are those cardboard score counters I mentioned earlier, although it was a while before I figured out how these things are supposed to work. I guess what happened is they ran out of space in the instruction manual to print a second example, because this is an easy concept that I didn't pick up on until like day 3. Column 1 is the tens digit, column 2 is the ones digit, add and subtract as you go along, and you can keep track of your strings without a calculator or a piece of scratch paper. But the fact that they felt the need to include these aids is a sign of just how complicated Gwent actually is. When you're playing it in the video game, it feels so simple and concise because the computer's remembering all the complicated modifiers, like weathers and factions and unit abilities, which can get forgotten after a few beers, trust me. As well as hard balancing limits that help assemble the player's deck in the game, but in real life become the cumbersome task of choosing 10 special cards with 22 unit cards minimum, with heroes counting as units, and 1 faction leader card. This setup, with every faction separated by card type, is what both boxes look like unpacked and what you're going to want to have ready for when people come over. Otherwise, everyone has to spend anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes sorting through the cards to build up their decks, sorting through them all by category, and then choosing which ones are the good ones, which is the process that reveals Gwent's balancing issues as a minigame. Especially in the Northern Realms deck, which is full of these low-strength cannon fodder cards who take up the same space and drawing chance as mathematically better cards. Why would anyone ever choose poor fucking infantry? What's the purpose of these cards? Actually, they do have a purpose: to motivate players of the video game to win better cards by playing more of the game's content. But the notion of there being just plain better unit cards also coincides with there being just plain better leader cards. This Nilfgaard leader's ability is to nullify the other leader's ability, and why would you never play that one? The chance of using a leader is situational, kind of uncommon, so nerfing both players is always a net win for you if you have this guy up. Why would you never deck Avalok? He basically counts as 2 free better cards. They're gonna nerf him, we know it. Plus, there's always a chance you can draw just a plain old bad hand of 10 at the beginning of a round, but as statistically unlikely as that is to happen, there's no safety mechanisms in place just in case it does happen. And just like in the video game, in real life, the Monster and Nilfgaard decks seemed suspiciously prone to winning the most matches. But with balance and rules issues out of the way, Gwent still remains an effective, fast-paced game of bluffing. You're essentially comparing 2 values against those of your opponents: the total strength of the hands you 2 draw, and the order in which you play cards that modify that value. The whole game is about bluffing the other player into playing their big cards early so that you can play your big cards when you want to instead. So with IRL's advanced facial expressions and nonverbal communication features, Gwent actually works on some magical, wonderful level even better than it does in a video game. But the issue is how hard it can be to get it to work in the first place, and finding people to play it with. All the friends I tried it on who hadn't spent tons of hours in the game got lost, even the geeky friends who already play card games. I was maybe able to work a way through a game with a lot of different people, but never elegantly, not without getting lost in some contradiction of some obscure rule somewhere. Take the cow card, for example. The stuff it does isn't printed on the card. The stuff the BDF card it turns into isn't printed on that card either. Look at the Scorch card. It affects the whole battlefield, but you might not play it like that if you're reading about the different Scorch unit card effect under the unit card special abilities reference card. And so on and so forth. Most of the friends I threw this game up to were, they were a real struggle. Until I got to Matt Visual, someone who has played like 80 hours of The Witcher and done all the same gwenting I had. And this is where the fun began. Rolling him over with the monster deck raised complaints at the usual suspects.
How does every card get Scorch? How does every card get Scorch?
It's how you gotta get good.
Balance your game. Next time you want to release something, you know, with something you have to pay for, maybe balance your game.
But no, it's just for the fans. That makes it okay. I'm gonna play Scoia'tael next, and we'll see how I do.
I'll win.
But then, me pulling off a more unexpected victory by strategically decoying a medic to revive a decisive Scorcher with him on the monster deck and me on the Scoia'tael, which I thought was the most underpowered deck, that, my compatriots, that was my greatest moment. A tactical coup that rivaled the genius of Sun Tzu. Except even I forget the rules occasionally.
Because you doubled them. If you did not double them, I would not have been able to Scorch them.
What do you mean? Of course you would.
Oh yeah,
Of course you would.
Yeah, because, you know, it's on the other side. If I played a regular Scorch card, I would have taken the pro, but anyways, it's fine. It's fine now.
The salt stopped flowing and Matt's losing streak finally ended with a decisive draw. My over-reliance on Scorches had us both drawing hands of 0 at the final round, until it was one of those easily forgotten rules that won him the match.
So that was a very, very unlikely victory from Matt, as all victories from Matt are.
Alright.
In which I was left with 2 Scorches in my hand.
So the bane of my existence, Scorches. He had 2 left. He drew a card because when you went around, you draw a card. He drew a Scorch. I put down my only card here, and then of course clear day. Scorch. And then the stupid, I was like, oh, I'm never gonna be able to use the draw.
Let me get a good clear view of it. Oh, it's never gonna be in focus. Hey, hang on, you gotta go backwards. There we go.
There it is.
Yeah, now you can see it.
I thought I was never gonna win with this.
See, those are the moments where Gwent was made real, where all the strategy and unpredictability of an evenly matched game was amplified by throwing shade in our attempts to dissuade. Because Gwent is a game of bluffing. You can draw a crappy hand, but if you're really good at bluffing, you can convince the other guy that you didn't. And that's a move you can't pull off against an AI. I think, when I look back at my whole experience of playing this minigame, there are really 2 different kinds of games of Gwent you can play. The high-level bluffing and strategy against 2 players who know their faction is great, but the low-level, where you have to deal with poor fucking infantry cards as you build up a crappy deck into a complete one, is more straight arithmetic against your opponent. And the balance issues that arise from Gwent being that, from being a little minigame in a much bigger game, is why it doesn't really stand alone in real life. You have something designed as a collectible card game being packed in the box of a deck-building card game. Compare that to Ascension, a real deck-building game where the whole playing process is building up a better deck than your opponent's, but no one has to do a bunch of counting until the very end of a match. Every card is useful, even the mathematically lesser valued ones, because they get played and upgraded and sold off as the early game turns into the later game. And then compare that to Gwent, where half of these cards are never going to get used in real life, which makes sense for the video game, but it's kind of a waste of paper in the real world. I mean, assuming if it was sold as a competitively viable game, because it's not. But there are a few places where Gwent could thrive, in the gaming halls of conventions, dealed out by sexy cosplayers and tipsy Ultra fans, and that's gonna be fun. Maybe. Remember that 8 to 10 minute long deck building process you're supposed to do before every match? That's something that could kill Gwent even as a game room novelty. It just takes too dang long to set up compared to how long the actual matches go. A problem that's either going to be solved by dealers passing out pre-built decks or everyone just dealing with it. Because as a computer-assisted minigame, it's got accessibility and balance issues pre-baked in. The real value of Gwent the minigame lies only in the highest levels it can go, between 2 complete decks and 2 players who know how to use them. Porting that into real life is fun, with all the fancy talk and clever bluffing humans can do in person that AIs can't. But bubbling that experience of the later game up to the surface level of the early game is going to be their biggest challenge with making Gwent stand alone on its own. I can't readily think of any other examples of minigames being turned into full games, so this is going to be one of the most interesting game format transitions ever.
Hey Matt, I won with the bad deck 2 times in a row.
You know, I thought I was good at this game, and then, you know, that moment when you realize that you're not good, and you're just washed up, you know?
I feel that every morning when I wake up.
Yeah, you just it's a horrible feeling, you know?
But then you realize that your partner's dick was full of too much scorch, and you wake up and you're like, oh no.